Hello and welcome to Inside Europe, the weekly current affairs podcast and radio programme from DW, Germany's international broadcaster. I'm Kate Laycock in Bonn. This week on the show, the meaning of Peter Magyar. Who is the man who has so dramatically swept Hungary's Viktor Orbán from power, and what does he want? We'll be looking for answers both in Budapest and Brussels.
The people of Hungary have spoken and they have reclaimed their European path. It is a victory for fundamental freedoms.
Then, Bardella's Princess Diaries. We look at the political implications of a right-wing romantic liaison, which has both the French and Italian press aflutter. That's all coming up here on Inside Europe.
Köszönöm nektek, hogy elhittétek.
Thank you for believing that it can be done. Thank you for believing that we can change our fate. Thank you for believing that we ourselves, the Hungarian people, write our own history. The words of the Hungarian politician Peter Magyar speaking outside the Budapest Parliament after the historic election victory, which has finally brought an end to Prime Minister Viktor Orbán's 16-year grip on power and raised hopes on both sides of the Atlantic that Orbán's much mimicked illiberal democracy model may be weaker than previously thought. Crucially, Magyar's TISA party has achieved an all-important two-thirds majority, which will give him the necessary mandate to reverse Orbán-era changes to the legal system, media control and the constitution. We'll be exploring what this means from a Brussels perspective later in the programme, but for now, the stage belongs to Magyar, Hungary, and by extension, to our Budapest correspondent, Stefan Boss. When I spoke to Stefan earlier, I began by confessing that it hadn't really been until I'd seen the election map of Hungary turn the light blue of Peter Magyar's new TISA party that I had fully realised the scale of what was happening.
Indeed, it's blue for TISA, and it is also more or less blue of the Tisa River, because the Tisa is the second largest river in Hungary. And it's much more than just a river. It's really a symbol for life, for tradition.
In order to turn that election map TISA blue, what had to be done? I mean, what were the obstacles to be overcome? Because they were not inconsiderable, were they?
They were extremely difficult. It has been compared to a biblical fight, even, I think, by himself, Peter Magyar, between David and Goliath. He really faced a huge machinery that has been built up by Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán over the last 16 years. And of course, I'm thinking about the influence of the Prime Minister over the media. There were also all kinds of reports by investigative journalists that even the Russian Secret Service was involved in helping Orbán, setting up a anti-Magyar campaign, so he had to deal with that. And then there were also all kinds of allegations against himself.
Well, indeed, and I mean, the nature of the election map itself, right? I mean, the very system which had been changed over a period of years to make exactly this kind of result almost impossible.
Indeed, and that was the other thing I wanted to mention, because under Orbán, the whole election map has been changed. So, for instance, in the area of Budapest, there have been a significant number of electoral districts. They have been changed or reduced, for instance, to make it more to the advantage of the ruling Fidesz party, which makes it very difficult for the opposition to win. But of course, what they did now, unlike previous elections, was that they said, all right, let's stand behind Peter Magyar, let's stop the divisions because it will be only used by Orbán, and let's focus on TISA. So in the end of the day, there are now basically three main parties in the parliament, and that is of course the TISA party, which has a clear two-thirds majority of the 199 seats. And then you have Fidesz, and then there is also a far-right party that has a few seats as well. I think it's really the biggest electoral victory that has happened to any party since the collapse of communism and the first democratic elections in Hungary in 1990, after all those years of communism here.
So an absolutely extraordinary result achieved against all odds. And a large part of the story here has been Peter Magyar's ability to capture the imagination and enthusiasm of young voters.
That you could really experience anywhere you went in recent days. Of course, also near the embankment of the Danube River, opposite the Parliament building. And there were really more than 100,000, mainly young people, I would say, really crying out that they have finally found someone who they believe understands them better. And this is what they said about the victory of Peter Magyar.
We had a system for 16 years that has been destroying democracy, consequently taking us closer and closer to Putin's Russia and further away. And now, finally, the people have answered.
When Orbán Viktor called Magyar Péter and congratulated, it was insane. This is national holiday from now on.
Well, as you can hear, they are quite enthusiastic. And of course, I think that also weighs on the shoulders now of Peter Magyar, who will now have to prove that he was worth their vote. Many of these young people were voting for the first time in their life. They never knew anyone than the current Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. So it's quite a challenge for the new Prime Minister, Peter Magyar, to really prove that he is the one they quite rightly elected for now.
Right. OK, which brings me, I think, probably to the most important question of all. Who, Stefan, is Peter Magyar?
That is indeed the question many Hungarians I spoke to were asking as well. Who is Peter Magyar? Because what we know, of course, is that he was also a Fidesz insider. He was, in other words, part of the party of Viktor Orbán. And he also had a position within the foreign ministry and also in a state-owned bank where he was responsible for all kinds of legal affairs because he is a lawyer by training. So he has a lot of experience. And of course, especially in recent years, he was also the member of the European Parliament. So he knows the workings of the European Union.
So in terms of what Magyar is expected to represent for Europe, Stefan, I feel like I have a fairly good grip on it, right? I expect him to represent a repositioning of Hungary towards Europe. I'm expecting Europe's rule of law concerns to be addressed. The speed at which that's possible remains to be seen, but, the direction seems to have been set. And also an end to Hungarian obstructionism, basically, which is particularly important in the context of Ukraine. But I think what I am not so clear about is his significance for Hungary. So maybe you could drill down into that for me.
It's a very interesting question. I think the significance for Hungary will be that he plans to dismantle what he calls the state propaganda machine and restore press freedom and overhaul or even temporarily shut down state media structures, because people feel that in many ways Hungary turned again to the past, to the communist past, when there was only one voice in the media. In addition, and that is I think what Hungarians are hoping for, is that Magyar has promised a crackdown, including a new agency tasked with recovering billions perhaps of public money lost through alleged abuse over the last 16 years. And he also made clear, and that's I think very interesting, also for Hungarians, that Hungary would, in his words, no longer be a safe haven for what he called international criminals. And of course, what is very interesting, I think, he is even keen to introduce the euro currency here, perhaps even in 2031.
Well, certainly symbolically, at least, the currency proposition is quite extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, that really is indicative of a new era and putting your money where your mouth is, quite literally.
Indeed, yes.
Stefan, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for talking to me from Budapest.
You're welcome.
Our Budapest correspondent, Stefan Voss there. The end of the Orbán era is not just big news for Hungary. In Brussels, too, European Union officials openly rejoiced at the decisive defeat of the man who has for so long been a thorn in the EU's side, holding up numerous EU initiatives and pieces of legislation, particularly if they were to help Ukraine or to punish Russia. From Brussels, Terry Schultz looks at how the new Magyar mandate may affect the entire bloc.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen welcomed the landslide victory of Peter Magyar's Tisza party just 17 minutes after Viktor Orbán conceded defeat. Evidence of how closely European leaders were watching this vote after years of Orbán obstructions of joint EU action. Hungary has chosen Europe, von der Leyen wrote on X. A day later, she called the election an exceptional evening.
The people of Hungary have spoken and they have reclaimed their European path. It is a victory for fundamental freedoms. And I really want to say to the Hungarian people, you've done it again, against all odds, like you did in 1956, when you courageously stood up, like you did it in 1989, when you were the first to cut the barbed wire that was dividing our continent. Of course, we will start working with the government as soon as possible to make a swift and overdue progress to the benefit of the Hungarian people. There's much work to be done.
Her commentary is all the more remarkable because typically EU officials would decline to comment on national elections, holding themselves to be above domestic politics. That shows how much the Orbán years traumatized Brussels. The outgoing prime minister had repeatedly even demonized von der Leyen and other top EU figures in his political campaigns, railing against the bloc while profiting from the billions of euros in EU aid his country receives every year. But there are billions more in EU funds that Hungary is not getting at the moment, suspended due to its failure to live up to EU rule of law standards. Making those funds flow to Budapest again will be one of the priorities of the new government, which Peter Magyar is likely to lead as prime minister. Peter Kreko is executive director of Political Capital, a Hungarian think tank, and was speaking at the European Policy Center in Brussels.
He desperately needs the EU funds. The goodwill from the side of the European Union is more or less given, I think, because of the fact that how destructive Viktor Orbán's policies have become in the last years against the European Union. I think EU institutions will do their best to help the new government, but at the same time, I think it's an important opportunity for the European institutions as well to raise conditions. And yes, of course, there are conditions for these funds.
A key area EU officials will be expecting to see progress in virtually immediately upon installation of a new government is the end of a blockade on a €90 billion EU loan to Ukraine. Orbán agreed to this loan in December when he received an opt-out so that Hungary won't be contributing financially to the loan. But he nevertheless then blocked it earlier this year when gas flows from Russia to Hungary stopped because, according to the Ukrainian government, Russia bombed the Druzhba pipeline carrying the fuel through Ukraine to Hungary. Activating that loan is urgent for the EU to help Kyiv. Orbán has also been holding up the 20th round of sanctions against Moscow imposed for its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Zsuzsanna Weg of the German Marshall Fund think tank, also speaking at the European Policy Center, says there needs to be a major shift.
The Hungarian government under Orbán has not been using the veto as an instrument to protect Hungarian interests. It was using the veto to protect Russian interests. So that very clearly will need to stop. And if you just listen to the past weeks of the campaign and how the narrative shifted into this also being a referendum about Hungary's place in Europe versus drifting towards Russia, Peter Magyar will have a strong push to actually address the Russia question and adopt a very different policy.
Because Magyar's Tisza party won more than 2/3 of parliamentary seats, he will have the political weight to push through real change. Viktor Orban's campaign focused heavily on opposition to funding Ukraine, portraying him as a wannabe peacemaker and the EU as a warmonger. Recent revelations that the Hungarian foreign minister consulted with his Russian counterpart even during EU meetings have not gone over well in Brussels. But Peter Krejko says the issue of Kyiv ties versus Kremlin ties has been handled gingerly by Magyar so far.
We could see during the campaign a very cautious Peter Magyar and Tisza when it comes to touching upon the issue of Russia and the issue of Ukraine. For example, emphasizing no fast-track accession of Ukraine to the European Union and so on and so on. I would say that it was predominantly a self-defensive strategy so that he is not labeled to be the agent of Ukraine as the government unsuccessfully wanted to label him, but he has way bigger room for maneuvering to do even a U-turn in Russia policy for sure, and maybe at least a 90-degree turn in the Ukraine policies.
So in some ways, Brussels has both exhaled in relief and is still holding its breath as it watches what happens in Budapest. Terry Schultz, DW, Brussels.
So much happening, so much to say. Follow DW Europe on socials for the latest from Terry and the rest of the Brussels team. We have a real-life princess story coming up next, but be warned, this ain't no fairy tale. You're listening to Inside Europe.
Quand trouveras-tu l'amour, l'amour qui durera toujours, où se trouve celui que j'aimerais tant, poème ou prince charmant.
The glossy French weekly magazine Paris Match, that staple of European celebrity lifestyle features, has published photos of an Italian princess on holiday on the island of Corsica. Nothing new there, except that the young man accompanying her on this apparently romantic break is none other than Jordan Bardella, the 30-year-old president of France's far-right National Rally Party, and, should Marine Le Pen's legal troubles continue to bar her from running, their candidate in next year's presidential elections. So, how is this liaison likely to impact on Bardella's chances? Here's our Paris correspondent, John Lawrenson, to game it out for us.
The Paris Match photos show them wandering near the sea in Corsica, almost holding hands, but perhaps not quite touching, in fact, looking happy in each other's company, at least. What might, to the uncynical, appear like a fairy tale couple. He, from a family of Italian immigrants, grew up in the poor Paris suburb of Drancy. She, a princess, literally, grew up between Paris, Monaco and Rome in one of the wealthiest families in Europe. Her father is a merchant banker, her mother the heiress to a fortune made making warships for the Italian Navy. He 30, she 22. They're both young, tall and good-looking. He a bit like the 1960s heartthrob Yves Montand. She a bit like Scarlett Johansson. The photos confirm a rumour that began when Bardella was seen leaving a party celebrating the 200th anniversary of the Figaro newspaper in the company of Princess Maria Carolina Bourbon Two Sicilies, Duchess of Sicily and Calabria, a direct descendant of Louis XIV, the Sun King, who built the Palace of Versailles. Jordan and the princess are, it would seem, en couple. Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet is a specialist in political communication, of which this is, he says, a good example.
The
photos are taken at a distance, a little but not too much as if they were taken without them knowing, but they're absolutely not natural, he said. You don't walk around naturally like that, impeccable with a sweater on your shoulders. People on the net have compared them to Ken and Barbie, and that is a bit what they look like. Everything is so controlled it can't possibly be spontaneous. But what these photos signify, says Moreau-Chevrolet, is that Maria Carolina Bourbon II Sicilies has just made her entrance as possible future First Lady of France. For Bardella, it's important too because there have been rumours about his sexuality. He was even asked during a TV interview whether he was homosexual. Also, these photos, this relationship, serve to reassure the public that he is not just an ambitious 30-year-old who wants power, but someone who is able to commit, to have emotions, to love other people too, and to build a life for himself. One possible problem for Bardella, says Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, is that she is an Instagram princess, posting about the functions she attends, her life as a socialite, with 200,000 followers. He's supposed to be the candidate of the working class, of the people. Is he now going to be seen as the candidate of the jet set?
C'est un message politique.
Political biography writer Catherine Ney agrees that the publication of these photos is a calculated political message. Jordan Bardella is now at the head of the polls. He knows that if he is a candidate in a year, he cannot, at 30 years old, arrive alone at the Élysée Palace. He can't arrive at the presidency with Marine Le Pen as a sort of regent. He doesn't have to be married, but he must at least be in a couple, Ney says. That gives an idea of stability, that he's ready to found a family. So he needs someone to accompany him. And it is true that among the French, it is difficult to be the companion of the leader of this party because you are immediately ostracized. You could lose your job, which is not a problem Maria Carolina Bourbon II Sicilies has to worry about. This is a good-looking couple, says Catherine Ney, that projects an idea of order. Perhaps there are even feelings as well. In any case, they form a team and, you know, sometimes that's what works best. For his part, the conservative Figaro newspaper journalist Alexandre Devecchio told listeners to Europe 1 radio that making the front cover of Paris Match is significant in itself. It's an important step in the de-demonization of the far right, he said. France's business elite has been worried in the past by what some believe to be the left-wing policies of National Rally when it comes to the economy. Perhaps they now consider that this is better than what Devecchio called the crypto-Bolshevism of the left-wing leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who may be Bardella's opponent in the second round of the presidentials next year. Back in the old days, when Jean-Marie Le Pen brought together a strange band of political misfits who had one thing in common, their dislike of immigration, one of the groups you'd see at his rallies were royalists, people who wanted to put a king back in charge of France. The National Rally has come a long way since the days of the National Front. Jean-Marie's daughter, Marine, and her lieutenant, Bardella, have done a lot to make the brand respectable. And they wave the French flag and sing the Marseillaise, symbols of the Republic the royalists hate even more than the rest. But it may be a woman with royal blood who helps the National Rally take power in France, and it may be the National Rally that puts a princess and descendant of Louis XIV in the presidential palace. It wouldn't be a real restoration, of course, but it would look good on Instagram. John Lawrenson, DW, Paris.
The trademark Lawrenson cynicism on full display there, as cutting as any guillotine. Our feedback address is insideeurope@dw.com. Cynics and dreamers are equally welcome. That's here on Inside Europe with me, Kate Laycock, in Bonn. Welcome back to Inside Europe, the weekly current affairs podcast and radio programme from DW, Germany's international broadcaster. I'm Kate Laycock in Bonn. Coming up, a Greenlandic perspective on, well, Greenland, Ireland's experimentation with a basic income for artists, and a genuine bona fide hymn to democracy. First, though, remember this.
Well, we're going to see what happens with Greenland. We need Greenland for national security, so we're going to see what happens. You know, we're doing the Golden Dome. We're doing a lot of things, and we really need it. If we don't go in, Russia's going to go in, and China's going to go in.
Ever since Donald Trump's hostile takeover overtures thrust Greenland to the forefront of European attention earlier this year, I've become conscious of how little I actually know about the island, located between the Arctic and Atlantic Oceans, but connected to Europe by centuries of colonial history, most recently by Denmark, of which it remains a sovereign independent territory. So it was in that spirit of curiosity that I reached out to my guest, and I will let her introduce herself.
My name is Malou Rosing, and I am an Inuk woman from Greenland. I grew up in the capital of Greenland, Nuuk, and I am currently working as an Arctic advisor at the International Work Group for Indigenous Affairs in Copenhagen, where I also live.
Greenland, Malou, was obviously thrust rudely into the limelight at the beginning of the year. But, I think it took that really for me to understand quite how little I knew about the country. Maybe you could tell me a little bit about what it was like to grow up in Greenland.
Everyone has their own experience, and the cities or the settlements are very different from each other. So you can't really say there's just one way of growing up in Greenland. But I think one of the things that mean the most to me is the sense of community. Like, we are smaller communities that are gathered or spread up and down the coast of Greenland in cities or in settlements that are sort of closed around themselves. There are no roads between any of the cities. So if you're traveling, you have to either fly or you have to sail, or sometimes you can hike or you can use your skidoo. So there's that very strong sense of connection and community to the people around you, and like you're being loved very out loud. Like when I finished my studies, I came home and my mom would tell her friends on the street, like, Malou just finished her studies, and everyone would be so happy and say, we're so proud of you. Like, it's very loving and very warm sort of community that we have. And then, of course, there's the connection to the surroundings as well. I grew up with sailing a lot and going into the fjords and spending a lot of time in nature and going hunting and fishing and just being outside a lot of the time.
Which language did you grow up speaking?
I've grown up speaking Danish. I know Greenlandic, but I don't speak it. The generations just before mine, and especially my parents' generation, were told that Danish was the right language to speak, and it was the proper language to speak, and it was the only way to ensure you got a proper education. It was sort of considered the better language, sort of, because you could get an education and then you could become whatever you wanted. They used to have A and B teams, or like A and B classes, where the ones that spoke Danish were considered the smart kids that would go on to have an education, and the Greenlandic speaking children weren't expected to thrive as well academically. There was this weird thinking around Greenlandic, but thankfully that was changed, and in 2010 Greenlandic was made the first language of Greenland, or Galaslit Nunat, and Danish was made the second language. But that sort of seeped into my generation a little bit. I'm working on my Greenlandic, and I definitely want to speak it because it's such an important part of a culture, I think, to be able to communicate in the language that's sort of the basis of the culture, I think, and like the way of thinking things and understanding the world.
Can you tell me more about that idea? I mean, what is it that's unique about Greenlandic as a window onto the world?
Every single little change in the wind or like whatever downfall there is have specific names. So it's sort of this respect for the surroundings of yourself. Like you have understanding of what's happening and you're sort of describing the world to yourself and to everyone else on what's going on. Like being aware, I think, almost.
That's really beautiful. And I mean, I guess it speaks to a culture, doesn't it, that's been shaped by its connection to the natural world, as you say. But of course, the climate's changing, and Greenland, which has got this massive ice sheet covering, some 80% of the land, is on the front lines of climate breakdown. Is that something that you were aware of growing up in Greenland?
Climate change has been talked about for the last many, many, many years. And, you know, that's one of the things that Greenland has been representing, like the climate changing. So it's always been something we heard on the news or something, you know, the grown-ups were talking about. Because you sort of get to know the seasons of the year, you know, but when they actually started acting differently than they usually would, like the snow would melt a lot earlier or a lot later, or we wouldn't be able to go skiing, or there was all of a sudden way more ice in the fjord.
And now, of course, climate change has opened up new possibilities for mining. And that's a conundrum because on the one hand, as you've said, respect for nature is a key part of Greenlandic culture. But then on the other hand, the revenues from mining, they're going to be essential for any aspirations that Greenland has towards sovereignty, towards independence from Denmark.
So mining is considered by the government as a very positive thing, but it's also very important to do it in a safe way, both for the people and the climate. And that's making it very difficult to sort of start up this whole mining business because there are a lot of restrictions that the mining companies are not necessarily willing to take into considerations. There was the case with the Gwennersøyd, the mountain in South Greenland that was really close to Narsaq, where there was talk about opening a mine that would have uranium as part of the byproduct of the mining. And that was closed down because the population didn't want uranium to seep out into the land or into the water, which is very close to the city of Narsaq. And that was a very big case because, you know, some people were saying, but we need this mining so we can become independent. We need this mining so we can have jobs in Narsaq. But the other half of the people said, but we can't risk our nature, like we can't risk our health.
Yeah, I mean, natural resources, of course, they can be a mixed blessing, can't they? They are, after all, one of the things that seems to have made the island so attractive to Donald Trump. So I suppose what I'm wondering is, what's the feeling in Greenland towards Denmark, the historical colonizer, now that its protection is crucial in seeing off a newer would-be colonial threat?
The Danish government is still pushing rhetoric sort of that we shouldn't be talking about independence right now. We should be standing together. And I completely agree. It's really important that we stand together strong on this issue. But we can't use this as an opportunity to sort of dim down the conversation on how to become independent, because it's still what most of the Greenlandic population wants. And it's, you know, something that's very much doable. It's just we need to change the way we're thinking about this. Denmark is a very rich country, and a lot of that wealth has come from the colonies and the colonization and taking resources out of Greenland and selling them and gaining a lot of economic wealth from that. But also, you know, why Denmark is so important in international politics. It's mainly because of Greenland and the position Greenland has geographically.
Melu Rosing is Arctic advisor at the International Work Group for Indigenous Affairs in Copenhagen. My thanks to Melu for her patience and generosity in helping me to share that Greenlandic perspective with you. Now, to a parenting mishap confession. The other evening, I made the mistake of telling my son not to stress too much about what he should be doing when he grows up, because nobody really knows what jobs are still going to be available by the time that he graduates, given all the disruption being caused by AI. Cue, of course, quite legitimate existential angst, which I was only able to assuage by explaining the concept of universal basic income and offering that up as proof that there are grown-ups out there giving serious consideration to the how will we live in the future question. So imagine my delight when I learnt that Ireland is engaged in just such an experiment, albeit not universal, because the beneficiaries of basic income here will be 2,000 artists. Applications for the scheme opened on April 15th, following an earlier pilot which ended in February. Sebastian Stevenson reports on the findings of that pilot and whether Ireland's offer really is a basic income at all.
At 56, going on 57 for the last couple of years, I believe in myself, and I believe in what I do, for the first time in my life ever. So it's taken me 5.5 decades, but I believe in myself.
That quote is from a participant based in the southeast of Ireland who was interviewed for a report about his time on a World First scheme, a basic income for artists. In February 2026, the same month the pilot was ending, the Minister for Culture, Patrick O'Donovan, announced that the scheme would be made permanent based on the findings of the pilot scheme.
What we saw is a lot of changes in terms of well-being. That was not a big surprise because it is something that other general basic income pilots have found before.
Nadia Fail-Kerher was the head of the research team for the basic income for the art scheme at the Department of Culture. Her team surveyed the participants and produced reports to see how the program impacted the artists and the sector. Along with the group that received payment of €325 a week, there was a control group that wasn't receiving any payment. Both groups were surveyed every 6 months for 2 years during the scheme.
We see an improvement in well-being, a decrease in depression, a decrease in anxiety, which a lot of the time is caused by financial problems.
One of the questions participants were asked is whether they had been feeling anxious or depressed in the last 4 weeks. In the final report, 54% of the paid group reportedly did, whereas in the control group, as many as 75% reported feelings of depression. The report also found that the paid group produced some more work and spent more time in their creative practices, about 11 hours more per week than the control group. According to an independent cost-benefit analysis of the scheme, for every euro invested in this scheme, Irish society received €1.39 in return. This figure includes the economic and cultural benefits as well as gains in well-being. So what was it like to be on the pilot? One of the band members from the band, Hot Girl, One Word, was on the pilot scheme.
I bear my mother's shame upon my shoulders.
Jake, who plays bass for Hot Girl, tells me what he did differently with the basic income.
I managed to rent a studio space in Dublin, which I'd never had access to before. Before it was all just strictly recording in my room, which is nice, and because you can capture your ideas whenever you need. But like the audio fidelity of my work definitely improved having access to actual equipment and a proper kind of studio space, you know. Travel, for example, is a big thing, and I've been able to play gigs further afield over this period of time, I'd say, because of, you know, just being more financially comfortable because of the scheme. So I guess, it definitely allowed me to take more risks. Then now I have to be a little more conservative with gigs I take.
Jake also mentioned the improvement to his well-being. However, Jake also works in the social care sector and didn't give up his job during the scheme. Part of that is due to the high cost of living in Dublin, Ireland's capital. Jake wasn't the only person who didn't entirely depend on the basic income. Jenny Dagg was an independent researcher from Maynooth University commissioned by the Department of Culture to interview 52 artists on their experience of receiving the payment. One of the things she found was how the people treated the payment as a supplementary income.
So it supported them to pay their bills, to, have food on the table. It really supported them to provide the basics. So that, in a sense, then relieved them to be able to, enjoy their artistic practice, that they're not struggling each week to get by.
But it wasn't just the practicalities, as Jenny says.
It shifted their sense of self. It increased their confidence, their self-belief. They felt empowered to make choices that aligned with their, how they envisioned their careers. And by shifting and transforming their work practices or taking on bigger projects.
The permanent scheme will take a new set of 2,000 artists, again for 3 years. But if you're going to receive this amount for a limited time, then is it really a basic income? Despite perhaps stretching the idea of an unconditional basic income, John Baker from the advocacy group Basic Income Ireland ultimately welcomes the programme.
One of the issues that arose in trying to make the scheme a permanent policy in Ireland was what they call the problem of fairness. If you only have enough money in your budget to pay 2,000 people, at least initially, how do you make that fair? And what they opted for was this scheme where you pay for 2,000 people for 3 years, then you pay to another 2,000 people for another 3 years, and so on.
From April 15th, professional artists residing in the Republic of Ireland can apply for the 2026-2029 cycle. So, is Jake going to apply?
Oh yeah, 110%. I'll definitely apply. Yeah, I think every musician in Ireland or every artist should do it. It's a no-brainer. It's a great scheme, and it's one of the few good choices our government have made in quite some time. So yeah, definitely will be reapplying.
Rock on then. Sebastian Stevenson, DW, Ireland.
Always so unhappy. You should try getting over yourself.
Perhaps somewhere out there in the multiverse we have harnessed the profits of AI for universal basic income for all citizens of planet Earth and are living our best, most creative lives. Just a thought. April 14th was World Quantum Day, and in celebration, we're bringing our quiz segment back out of retirement with the following question. Which German physicist is considered the father of quantum theory for introducing energy quanta in 1900? Was it A. Albert Einstein, B. Max Planck, C. Werner Heisenberg, or D. Erwin Schrödinger? Head on over to Spotify to take part. You're listening to Inside Europe. I'm Kate Laycock in Bonn. Finally this week, can a concert by a choir serve as a manual for political resistance? The Berlin ensemble, Bankante, believes so, as they prepare to launch Advanced Democracy, a concert programme linking the threats of the 1930s to the realities of the present day. Brendan O'Shea joined the singers as they navigated a complex repertoire ranging from suffragette anthems to Holocaust remembrances to find out how music can help hold the line against authoritarianism.
On a quiet Sunday afternoon in Berlin, the 60-plus members of the choir are hard at work, choosing rehearsal over a restful afternoon. The ensemble, made up of amateur singers from all walks of life, was established just over 10 years ago. It's led by artistic director and conductor Tobias Valenciak.
When we started 10 years ago, nobody expected the way things went. It's cool to still have so many people that started 10 years ago who were not choral singers at that time. What I find important is to have a good connection to the group, to be very clear about what being part of the choir, what it demands.
That sense of commitment shapes the choir's work. Each year, Bankata presents 3 to 4 thematic programs, often combining music from different eras. Their upcoming concert, titled Advanced Democracy, takes on an urgent tone, a call to action, says Valenciak.
The overall subject, so this advanced democracy thing, and protect our society and stick together and overcome separation, and so all the things that are around us in everyday life and that people are confronted with, I think this is helpful that when we meet in the choir rehearsal, that everybody has the feeling it's relevant. So the pieces that we sing, I mean, they are 100 years old or 80 years old or 60 years old, but the texts, they are so contemporary.
Time to rise, democracy. Time to rise up and cry. And what our fathers fought for, we're not allowed to die.
At the centre of the programme is a choral work by Benjamin Britten, written in 1938 on the eve of the Second World War. It urges citizens to defend freedoms hard won by previous generations, a message that feels strikingly current.
When I first encountered this piece, it was striking that it was so contemporary, and that the problems that the text dealt with, so this threatened democracy, the fear of war.
For choir member Caroline Voigt, who joined the ensemble last year, the parallels became clear during rehearsal.
I remember sitting in rehearsal, reading through the text, and I really remember that moment when a person around me said, "Look again, which year is it?" And it's the year 1939. And you read it and you see so many similarities when you are in the present. So practicing this advanced democracy piece is like really a going back and forth between past and present.
For chorister Stéphanie Plateau, a founding member of the ensemble, the music feels like a direct response to the present moment.
Ich bin total motiviert. Ich finde das richtig
She says she's totally motivated by the music as it feels like a wake-up call. And she says she's ready to give the project that energy because it reflects how she feels about the world around her. This urgency runs through the wider programme. Alongside Britain, the choir brings together composers who've responded to oppression in their own time. Works by Amy Beach and Ethel Smythe sit alongside music by Lily Boulanger and Eric Seisel. Voices shaped by war, exile and political upheaval.
To program Britain's advanced democracy, or also the pieces from Seisel or Boulanger with the French. This is in many spheres, it's a step for us. And so all the things that are around us, when we meet in the choir rehearsal, that everybody has the feeling it's relevant.
For baritone Joachim Laubrock, one particular line from the Britain work stands out.
I think maybe my favorite is that what our fathers fought for, we're not allowed to die. So in the context of the opposite of democracy, autocracy, I think, and I mean, that is also why it is so current.
But the programme doesn't only warn of danger, it also reflects on the long struggle for rights and participation. Ethel Smythe's The March of the Women, an anthem of the suffragette movement, is a reminder of that history. Caroline Voigt.
I feel very connected to those women who really were the first ones to claim those rights, and it reminds me that there is a privilege in it to have those rights. It's not global, it's not a global right to have those voting and participation rights.
From determination, the tone shifts towards reflection. The music of Eric Seisel carries the weight of history, shaped by exile and loss, and heard today with the knowledge of what was to come.
So knowing his biography and knowing that his father was killed by Germans in a concentration camp, this is included in performing his music. So this is, from the biographic point of view, it was also actually quite easy to convince our singers that it's important to include this composer in the program.
Adding a contemporary layer of tragic significance, the choir's program also includes the music of HungaryEUrelations, a Ukrainian composer who passed away shortly after the Russian invasion of her country in February 2022. For many in the choir, that connection between past and present brings the program into sharp focus, says longtime choir member Elke Hartmann.
I think it's a wake-up call. And I think we should join the people who are warning against what can happen. What's good in these times that there are so many people who are aware that it's difficult. But it seems to be we are so stunned. We stand there and don't know what to do.
As Bankanta works through this demanding repertoire, one question remains. What should the audience take away? Tobias Valenciak again.
That the means to overcome this is to stick together and to stand up for democracy. So this is a point where we all gather in the group. And so this is where I take my security to manage the process and to be sure that this performance will be a big success for us.
Bankanta's program, Advanced Democracy, is more than a concert. It's a reflection on the present, a warning drawn from the past, and a reminder of music's enduring role in times of uncertainty. For DW, this is Brendan O'Shea in Berlin.
And that brings us to the end of this week's show. Our production team this week was Laura Kabelka, Mieke Leikok and Emma Meyer. Our email address, which we do check regularly, is insideeurope@dw.com. Inside Europe comes to you from DW in Bonn.
I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're With the World, Public Radio's leading global news program.
We cover the biggest news events developing every day and give you the context you need to make sense of them.
And Carolyn, I also like our smaller stories, tales of discovery and human kindness, things that make us laugh.
Stories that kind of shrink our world and make us feel more connected.
Subscribe and listen every weekday to The World.
When headlines get louder, we go deeper.
Say hello to Berlin Briefing,
your guide to Germany's impact on the world. Between East and West, autocrats and democrats, Germany's whole system is under stress.
Pressure from all sides.
And the world around Germany is getting more dangerous.
Is democracy glitching? Too much noise? Too little clarity?
We decode what it means for you. From Berlin to right where you are.
It's all in Berlin Briefing on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.
And of course, you can subscribe to Inside Europe as well. You'll find us also wherever you get your podcasts.